welcome everyone to Dharma Conversations. As you may remember, we started a fresh series, and the series is on the untold story of the Congress Party, the history, evolution, and the primary motive behind this has been to chronicle an authentic version of how the Congress Party was formed, how it evolved, and how it evolved to come to know what we are today as the Congress Party that we see. And we started this conversation with none other than Sandeep Balakrishnan. In the first episode, he touched upon some aspects as the founding father was a gentleman who did not belong to India, which may not have been a well-known fact. And more than that, the objective was to keep the Indian population, in a sense, under control as a safety valve so that the Britishers could manage us better. And I thought that was a revelation. So we shall continue Dharma Conversations. This will be the second episode of that Chronicle of Congress that we started with Sandeep. So thank you all for joining, and let's get started with Sandeep Balakrishnan. Hi Sandeep. So let's continue the conversation we started with you last time, where we are looking at you to give us a complete, authentic version of how the Congress Party was formed, how it evolved and devolved over the years. You touched upon, as usual, given your knowledge, you covered a few interesting aspects of the formation of the Congress Party, which to my mind were not very well known. So let's continue from there. So we were to get into the part that after it was formed, how did the transfer of power and how did the transfer of power to Indians come into being? And then we'll take it further from there. So could you take us from where we stopped last time?
Yeah, absolutely, Parag. Thanks for giving that important context. So just to sum up the last episode, we saw how Alan Octavian Hume, a Scotsman, basically started the Indian National Congress, and how his initial target audience was the first or the second generation of Indian students studying in Calcutta University. And how, on the one hand, he was addressing these students on the importance of starting an organization like the Indian National Congress, how it would, politically reform India. And on the other side, he was carrying on a secret correspondence with Lord Dufferin, who was the Viceroy of India back then, in which he stated in no ambiguous terms that the Congress was envisioned as an organization to be a safety valve that would prevent another eruption like 1857. So that's where pretty much where we left it. And we also looked at how the history of the Congress Party written by Pattabi Sitaramaya completely omits this fact of the foreign origin of the Congress Party. Now, with that completes pretty much the first phase of the history of the Congress Party. Before we get into the second phase, let's broadly look at the climate, national climate of that era. When I say national, I include social, cultural, educational, and
all
pretty
aspects.
Much all encompassing, all aspects. So Evo Hume's success in launching the Congress Party was assured, and it was immediate because it came out of the blue, almost like a bomb, and that bomb was flung by the British, which they clothed in the finery of benevolence.
Okay.
Right? But this was short-lived, which is where we can segue into today's episode. Because an organization like the Indian National Congress was the proverbial genie waiting to be unbottled. Right? And in a very short span, which really alarmed the British, once it was unbottled, it completely spun out of British control. But at the same time, Evo Hume makes one observation in this context, which is entirely true. What he says, and I quote, is that the Congress was the outcome of the labors of a body of cultured men, mostly born natives of India.
Well, this is misleading, right?
No, it's not misleading. He was entirely bang on target. Remember what I said about his target audience.
Okay.
The British educated university students who were all Indians.
So that's what he means by culture.
Yeah, and they fell for it.
Okay, understood.
Right. So this is what R.C. Majumdar, he writes a short commentary on this statement of Hume. He says, and I quote, "The Indian National Congress was brought into existence as an instrument to safeguard the British rule in India."
The safety wall put in no uncertain terms.
Correct. So, what was the nature and the outlook of the initial Indian supporters of this infant Congress? The broad audience, the broad target audience, and members of this A.O. Hume-led founded INC included prominent businessmen, lawyers, some magistrates who were Indians, activists, educationists, university professors, so on. Some of the initial names include Dadabhai Nauroji, Badruddin Tyabji, Firoz Shah Mehta, K.T. Telang, Gopalakrishna Gokhale. And what was the common traits that, the names that I just, read out, no group of unlikely people who could not see eye to eye with each other on the most fundamental issues, this kind of an unlikely grouping came together for the first time. So all the names I mentioned, Firoz Shah Mehta, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Badruddin Tyabji, they, apart from a love for India, apart from their high educational attainment, their success in business, their status as eminent men, nothing really united them in that sense.
So what was the glue?
I'll tell you. The glue or the common trait that they all shared was a naive, innocent and childish faith that the British were a truly moral and ethical people who just needed to be convinced of the legitimacy of their demands. Demands of these Telang, Gokhale, all that. And once they were convinced, once the British were convinced, they would pack up their bags and leave India immediately. So they actually had this kind of childish belief. Of the, in the justness of the British rule and benevolence. Now, while we can't blame them, but at this distance in time, you could actually assign a reason for their innocence, their naivete, on the inherent ancient dharmic consciousness of that was flowing in their blood, and add to this a mix of the ascendant English education system, the Macaulay education system, in which they had been brought up, in which they spent their formative years, plus a more common sense factor. All these people largely were, in a sense, privileged and belonged to the English educated Indian classes who did not have the stomach for an all-out bloody war that erupted in 1857. But you look at Western writers, Western journalists, Western authors of the same period, and how they analyze this class of Indians who initially joined the INC. Without exception, these Western historians and writers, contemporaries, they express a sense of incredulity and amazement when they notice the attitude of these Indians, because they hail from the same soil, Europeans, Americans, British. They could clearly see what the British really was. It was an imperial justification for an unlimited, unquenchable, ruthless and heartless bleeding and plunder of India. And they were stunned when they saw that these Indians, who were the victims of this British imperialism and plunder, they thought that the British were actually benevolent.
So, this may not have been a part of, but what explains this gullibility? I mean, before, this is like even before we were colonized in a sense.
Yeah.
So, what explains us?
This is after we were colonized.
Okay.
INC was formed
when after colonization.
1885.
Yeah. No, you mentioned the Macallo education system had taken its toll already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well after we were colonized.
So
already 25 years had passed after, India passed formally into British crown.
Okay. So
that, and they actually believed genuinely that the British rule was a force for good. That they united India and the rest of it. So anyway, but which brings us to the next stage or the next phenomenon which we need to look at in some detail. Even as the INC had been formed by Evo Hume, this was the overall climate prevailing in India. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, this was at the height of what is known as the modern Indian Renaissance. It was a height of that movement, of that phenomenon. You had extraordinary spiritual stalwarts like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyaya, and what united all these stalwarts was spirituality. They laid the real foundations of the political phase of the Indian freedom struggle, which later emerged, in its political organization, activist form. Its real foundations were spiritual, which were laid by Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and saints of that eminence. And this was the enduring base on which the freedom struggle was built. Now contrast this with the landed elite of the previous phase, the first phase. Firoz Shah Mehta, Dadabhai Naoroji, all those people. I need to explain this spiritual climate or the climate of cultural revival, which brings us to the second phase of the history of the Congress party. Now, in the second phase, the Congress that Evo Hume had created was slowly beginning to become the proverbial Frankenstein's monster right after the second session of the Congress party, which happened in 1886. Okay. And this session initiated a decisive transformation under the leadership of none other than Surendranath Banerjee, the same leader that Evo Hume had kept out.
So he kind of came back on the table.
He came back to the Congress, and he was so successful, his leadership was so decisive that Viceroy Dufferin, fitting name, Dufferin, he left India thoroughly upset, outraged and disappointed, and he had nothing but contempt against an organization that he had himself helped to create, because it was no longer under British control. And the second session in 1886 also inaugurated what I call as the Surendranath and Tilak era.
Surendranath again is one of the gentlemen who's not got his due. That's the impression I'm getting
in
the annals of the Congress.
He hasn't.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah. Now, this, to my mind, was truly the most glorious period in the history of the Indian National Congress as an overall organization, and this period lasted for roughly about 2 decades.
2 decades.
2 decades. That is, it lasted up to the arrival and the emergence of Mohandas Gandhi, who infected the Congress with his HIV virus called non-violence. Okay. Now, a foreign journalist who surveyed, contemporary journalist who surveyed, was a contemporary of the second phase. He noted, and I quote, how the Congress became truly national not in 1885 but in 1886, the year in which Surendranath Banerjee joined it. Close quote.
Rich tributes.
It was truly a heady period in our national history, and it was also the making of a profound epoch that was, slowly spreading its wings. It was, broadcasting its message of nationalism, cultural revival throughout the country. This is when the Congress began to truly become a pan-Indian organization. And as a result, a slow but unstoppable way of nationalism, which was inspired by countless droplets of cultural renaissance, was slowly sweeping throughout the country. And elsewhere in the exact same year, 1886, this is very important. In the same year, 1886, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa had merged into eternity. He had left the mortal world, and exactly in the same year, Swami Vivekananda sat in deep meditation at Kashipur in Bengal. His meditation, the subject of his meditation, was to find the best method of continuing his great Guru's work. And around the same period, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, who had founded the Arya Samaj, we know that, that Arya Samaj had already become a great force of infusing the Sanatana spiritual, cultural, renaissance, to which he added the martial force. Okay?
So
Akhadas, gymnasiums basically, akhadas, wrestling areas sprouted, they exploded throughout north and northwestern India, parts of what is today known as Pakistan, throughout that region. This was a great seminal work pioneered by Swami Dayananda Saraswati and his successors, his followers. Elsewhere, Mahadev Govind Ranade, extraordinary stalwart, and Lokmanya Tilak were also blazing a brilliant trail primarily in Maharashtra, Gujarat and allied regions. And in Bengal, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyaya was scorching the British with his fiery and inspirational speeches and writing. He is the author of India's national song Vande Mataram. It fittingly occurs in his novel Anand Bhatt. Where did Bankim receive the inspiration to write Anand Bhatt? From Sannyasi Andolan. It is the
spiritual foundation.
Yes, it is the greatest tribute by any Indian, by any Hindu, given to the Sannyasi Andolan. Okay, and I can just reel out the names of any number of such stalwarts and giants, and these are biographies that have already been written in pages etched with gold. We have to revive these biographies once again for our own troubled times, which is the contemporary
entirely agree.
era.
I mean, the stalwarts need
Yes.
to be back.
So they need to get their rightful status due. And it is this legacy, it is this extraordinary legacy that Mohandas Gandhi single-handedly destroyed in ways that we are fully yet to understand. This is notwithstanding the fact that he genuinely respected them, but did everything in his power, in his misguided vision and methods to undo it. But that is a story that we'll reserve for a future episode. Now, few people will know that even as these extraordinary stirrings were happening, they were in the second phase of the history of the INC. These things, all this news of all these movements, were also reported regularly by the London-based newspaper, The Times. You know what it noted? A recurring theme that occurred, in these news reports from The Times was how not a single Muslim member had joined the INC.
Oh, so from then onwards itself.
Then onwards. Okay, but let's pause here, and I will take you. I'll take the audience back to the another facet, a parallel aspect of this great cultural renaissance, spiritual renaissance that was happening. When you look at the picture of the Muslim society, this was in the the rough timeline is from the early part of the 19th century till the end of the 19th century, right? Now, what do we see there? What we see is the emergence and the hectic activity of an extremely powerful Muslim elite, primarily in the Western UP belt. Even today it holds true, who were struggling for survival and the maintenance of their privileges that they had taken, that they had enjoyed and had taken for granted throughout the Mughal rule. That was shattered. That power was broken most notably after the death of Aurangzeb. Once Aurangzeb died, influential islands of this Ashraf elite in the Muslim society known as Ashraf. This Ashraf elite had nowhere to go. So what they did was they began to carve out small little islands of their own personal power in order to hold on to whatever was left of their dominance.
The vestiges of their glorious...
Right. Even that was decisively shattered to dust after the British brutally suppressed what they call as a revolt of 1857. Okay, with that, I think that was 1857 was one of the single most important death blows to shatter the power of this Ashraf elite. Okay, and this epochal episode not only pulverized the backbone of this Ashraf elite, it also instilled the sort of a near permanent dread, which is comparable perhaps to what Genghis Khan did to the sweeping Islamic empire in the medieval period. As a result, all the Muslim revival movements that had been started before 1857 were completely shattered. They came to a standstill because survival became the immediate imperative, survival of this Muslim elite. So what the Ashraf elite did to survive reads like a chronicle of willing servitude. Okay? And the human form, the kind of methods that they adopted just so that they could retain
relevance.
Their relevance and their hold over whatever islands of power that they had. It's really, it makes the stomach churn, the kind of methods that they employed. And the human form of this servility for the sake of survival was a gentleman named Syed Ahmad Khan. And Syed Ahmad Khan continues to be the perennial object of erotic dreams of our secularists. Okay. Now, when Syed Ahmad Khan kind of surveyed the scene, he knew that there was no way, even if the whole Muslim community united as a single body, there was simply no way that they could pose any kind of challenge to the British rule. So when you can't challenge, you supplicate. This was the initial strategy of Syed Ahmad Khan. So what he did was that he transformed himself into a political huckster.
Okay.
So step number one is that he supplicated before the all-powerful East India Company. He began his initiatives when the when the rule of India had not yet passed to the British Crown. Okay, and Syed Ahmad Khan comes from, or rather he is a descendant of a very powerful landed gentry who served as nobles in the Mughal court, right? And successive Mughal kings, they had richly patronized his forefathers. But Syed Ahmad Khan, deep down, never forgot what the Mughal power truly represented, and he had a great longing and nostalgia, to revive that power, meaning a pure Muslim rule, in his words. And he began to assiduously work for its revival, and he knew that in his own lifetime, he would not see the success of his efforts at reviving the imperial Muslim power. And groveling before the British was part of this revival effort, right? And Syed Ahmad Khan was the original progenitor of nearly half a century long Muslim collaboration with the British against the numerically and politically superior Hindus.
Okay.
You know why he is loved so much by our secularists? For this reason. Okay? And he also knew that he was powerless, or rather he would have no voice in the fledgling Indian National Congress, which is one of the reasons why he did not enter it, take its membership, or the reason that he could not set up a rival Muslim organization.
And instead he chose to go to the place where power originated.
Yeah. So in return for his efforts, he received all kinds of, over-glorified titles and awards from the imperial British governors. He became Sir, which is knighthood, considered to be a big deal in those days. But above all, his servility to the British gave him what he really wanted. Forget the knighthood and the other privileges and awards. The British gave him what he really wanted, which was an open field to propagate and seed the toxic ideology called the two-nation theory. He got an open field to do this work. Okay? And here we see what kind of a fanatic that Syed Ahmad Khan really was. And here I'll give you a small quote, drawn from his own writings. Quote. He writes, this is an address to the Muslim community. Quote, "Do not show the real face of Islam to others. Instead, show your face as a follower of true Islam, representing character, knowledge, tolerance and piety."
Oh, this is such an interesting fact, which is so less known. It is a complete charade.
Absolutely. And he did not really disguise his intent in both writing and speech. You can look at the complete works of Syed Ahmad Khan. It is right there in black and white. They didn't need to hide these things.
So one question, and I think you're best placed to authoritatively say this. Deliberately and provocatively, often Savarkar is maligned as the originator of the two-nation theory. It is actually not him. It is this gentleman.
It is Syed Ahmad Khan, right?
Yeah, I wanted you to say it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And naturally, these people are very tenacious. People like Syed Ahmad Khan and of his and his kindred spirits, they are extremely patient and tenacious. Hats off to them on that count. And slow, patient and constant work for years naturally yielded good dividends. One of the great dividends was something called the Aligarh movement, which over time quickly became a vast and extremely powerful den which provided intellectual and academic varnish for the gradual and methodical revival of Islamic political power in India. Right? Even today, Aligarh Muslim University stands on extremely firm grounds, very deep-rooted, very sturdy grounds. Syed Ahmad Khan also gave birth to two prominent Muslim leaders who followed his mold. The first was Allama Iqbal, who was the fourth or fifth generation descendant of a Kashmiri Pandit family who converted to Islam.
Oh, is that so?
So this was the first leader, his Shagird, Syed Ahmad Khan's Shagird, Allama Iqbal and Muhammad Ali Jini.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so a lot rests at his feet.
Yes.
Syed Ahmad Khan.
Yes. And this is how the Ashraf elite slowly began to regroup and recoup their power bit by bit. What Syed Ahmad Khan and his so-called Aligarh movement did in a parallel track was to constantly denigrate and denounce the fledgling Indian National Congress. So this neatly ties in with the second phase of the history of the Congress Party. I think in one of the sessions of the Indian National Congress, I think fourth or fifth session, when the ordinary Muslim populace kind of began to listen to Congress Party's Indian National INC's discourse, this is what Syed Ahmad Khan told publicly. It was a warning, and I quote, "If you accept that the country should groan under the yoke of Bengali rule and its people lick the Bengali shoes, then in the name of God, jump into the train and be off to Madras." So this came in the wake of a Congress session planned in Madras. This was a message that Syed Ahmad gave to the Muslim community, warning that don't have any association with the INC, it's a party of Hindus.
In so many words.
In so many words. Okay. Of course, he couldn't openly use the word Hindu because, of the prevailing climate of weak Muslim political power. So he called them Bengalis. All right. It was a good enough substitute. And so you see where this is, how all these forces are working, very complex forces. On the one side, you have British at the peak of their colonial power, whose, we all know their methods to divide and rule. The biggest division was Hindu versus Muslim, and later dividing the Hindu communities, pitting them against each other. So part of this divide and rule policy. And the British to the Muslims, they said, look, we are aware that you were the natural rulers of India before we came. Okay? And what we are doing is that we are safeguarding your community against the numerically superior and powerful Hindus.
Well played.
So this was their gambit. All right? And Syed Ahmad Khan also played along with this, right? And it was constant with his illicit deal making with the British against the Hindus. See how each person is, using the other. And in the fourth Congress session, which was held in Allahabad, Prayagraj now, there in that session, he did something else. Right in the city, even as the Congress party had pitched its tent, for organizing the session, overnight, Syed Ahmad Khan set up a rival political shop, and with the help of the local British authorities, including the police,
okay,
he sent out an open threat to the Muslim community in Allahabad. He said, anyone, especially Muslims, will be subject to brutal and unrestrained street violence if they as much as stepped into the tent of the Congress session.
Threatened with street violence.
Alright? And independent India released a postage stamp commemorating the great achievements of Syed Ahmad Khan as recently as 1973. It is more than 25 years after partition, which was caused by the very theory that this same man espoused and worked for.
The originator of the two nation theory.
Right.
In fact, instead of erasing him from the annals of history, we've glorified him, and the other way around for some of those who contributed,
Exactly.
like Surendranath, Banerjee.
And it does not stop here. Like every bigoted Muslim leader of that era, Syed Ahmad Khan also emitted nostalgic duas, sighs of melancholy and longing for, ki when will we re-establish the glorious Mughal rule. And this, in practical terms, it translated, as it always does, it translated into a narrative of, surprise, Muslim victimhood.
Okay. So actually a lot goes back to Syed Ahmad Khan. I mean, all the troubles.
Muslim victimhood and a narrative of fear mongering within the community that the Congress freedom struggle was nothing but an evil plot to establish a Hindu Raj.
Oh, so what we're seeing playing out today against the ruling party it's a replica of what started then.
This was the exact same accusation leveled by the Nehruvian Congress Party, first against the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, Jana Sangh and the Bharatiya Janata Party.
So what Syed Ahmad Khan spoke of the Congress spoke of the RSS and the Jana Sangh.
It was the ultimate victory of Jinnah.
Truly.
That the Congress, the very same Congress party that he despised, was mouthing his own language.
Excellent success.
Right? This is unparalleled, I think, in the history of mankind. Okay? Now, so with this, let's return, once again to the second phase of the freedom struggle or the history of the Indian National Congress. Here, the Congress leadership of that era, it, along with its activism, cultural renaissance and, other profound activities, it genuinely mentored and gave political training to young men and encouraged education among Hindu women, and it also infused an abiding spirit of love and reverence for Bharatavarsha, right? The kind of solid mentoring that it gave is, unprecedented. It can't be replicated, in my view. So as a result, one of the great symbols of this reinvigoration and resurgence was something called Bharata Mata or Mother India.
Okay.
That was one of the original recreations of a deeply, Hindu ideal of femininity. Bharata Mata as Devi, right? And every, it resonated nationwide. So when we understand this phenomenon in this sense, the all-encompassing, the rich and the undiluted, profundity of the freedom struggle, it unfolds before us, before our eyes, and it's deeply moving, Parag. All right. This is how R.C. Majumdar describes the picture of that period. Quote: "This leadership quickened a sense of national pride in the heart of Indians in an indirect way through the personality, character, patriotism, and high intellectual eminence of the great galaxy of eminent leaders who nurtured this infant institution and brought it safely to an adolescent stage, and made a deep impression not only upon all classes in India, but even upon Englishmen as visible embodiments of the intellectual and cultural progress of India." Close quote.
Very, very moving. Powerful.
It was not an accident that foreigners, Europeans primarily, like Annie Besant, Sister Nivedita, it was not an accident that, they completely embraced Indian culture, which is primarily Hindu culture. It was the work and the personal character and eminence of these stalwarts.
Easily.
As simple as that. Thousands and millions of books and written words will scarcely make an impact as much as a profound personality does. Because he lives those ideas.
The embodiment itself.
Yes. And that is the greatest magnet, which is why Europeans embraced our culture in quite substantial numbers. Okay, and this extraordinary leadership, this magnetic personality of all those stalwarts, it steadily moved the Indian National Congress away from the clutches of the elite of the earlier, of the founding first phase of the Congress party, like Dadabhai Nauroji, Firoz Shah Mehta and other people who were patriots, yes, but who vainly appealed to the good graces of their own oppressors. Okay?
Very telling.
And the leaders of this second phase put the cultural revival and the freedom struggle to where it genuinely belonged, to the unbrainwashed masses who were solidly rooted in their ancient cultural moorings and their traditions and lifestyles. This is the greatest achievement of the stalwarts of the second phase of the leadership of the Indian National Congress. This is precisely why Bankim resonated so awesomely with the masses when he described Bharata Mata as Durga and Kali. These are the great epithets that he showers. You find this in Vande Mataram. Tvami Durga, Tvami, that whole names of Goddess Parvati. This is also why Lokmanya Balagangadhar Tilak could single-handedly create two glorious traditions from the scratch.
And they were?
The Shivaji Jayanti celebrations and the Ganapati festivals,
absolutely,
which have endured till date. Can you imagine Mumbai? Can you imagine Maharashtra today without the Ganapati festival?
In fact, it is popular across states.
Right? This is
Bengal,
what one
Karnataka.
man seeded. This is called having a pulse over the masses. One man did this.
Absolutely.
And these are all the great luminous contemporary examples of how parampara procreates itself.
Salute.
Tradition or parampara is often, the way we have been colonized at every level, Parag, is that we automatically understand the exact opposite of a word from its original definition. So when you use the word parampara, what are the associations that come immediately? Superstition, backwardness, a past era, outmoded era, regressive. No, parampara is a continuum
Of the best practices.
It is a continuum. It is a river, right?
No, I know good things.
Yeah.
Need not be regressiveness.
So this is how people like Tilak did this. They tapped into that river. You cannot, they say, like Aristotle says, you can't step into the same river twice. So it's a flowing current. Tilak just tapped into one droplet of that, and look what magic he created.
What magic, which endures, like I said, till this day.
Right. And this was a grand cultural, and remember, this did not happen just in Maharashtra. You know who recreated the even Tilak here, where he took this inspiration for public Ganpati festival? From a Bengali Hindu king named Raja Navkrishan Singh.
Okay, Raja Navkrishan Singh.
So it is spelt as Nubkisen.
Okay.
Okay, Raja Navkishan, not Singh, Navkishan Sen.
Same.
Right? So he recreated and revived the world famous Durga Pujo for the first time after a lapse of 200 or 250 years of Mughal rule, which had banned public festival of Durga Pujo.
And the saddest part is, today's elected government in that state, you need to seek permission to do.
She has outdone Aurangzeb.
Any day.
She has outdone Aurangzeb on all fronts. All right. So Tilak took these inspirations. So Maharashtra, Bengal, Punjab. I mean, the list is endless, and it is pan-Indian. Remember, the India of that time included Pakistan. Let's not forget this. All right. So this grand cultural reawakening, the British correctly perceived this cultural awakening as one of the greatest threats, if not the greatest threat, and used the excuse of the Shivaji festival, public Shivaji Jayanti. They used it as an excuse to persecute Lokmanya Tilak. They put him in jail. Alright, you should read the full. There is a book on the trial of Lokmanya Tilak. It is very moving. We can do a separate episode on that.
Who wrote that?
It was written by one of his disciples.
No, your audience would definitely want to know.
It was written by one of his
disciples. Trial of Lokmanya
Tilak. Trial of Lokmanya Tilak. Okay. And this trial moved R.C. Majumdar so deeply, and the way he writes it, it's so evocative, it's so passionate. I'll read out some excerpt from it. Quote, "The trial and conviction of Tilak may be regarded as a landmark in the history of Indian nationalism. The martyrs replaced mere orators as acknowledged champions of liberty." Mere orators, remember? Firosha Mehta, Gokhale. Okay.
So well said.
The martyrs replaced mere orators as acknowledged champions of liberty. Tilak rightly thought that around the personality of Shivaji, he could gather all patriotic and national forces. The inspiration which Western democratic teaching gave to us was rather weak and outlandish. But the worship of Shivaji was such as even the ignorant villager could understand. Shivaji and Swaraj were synonymous. Tilak brought political philosophy in India from heaven to earth, from the council hall to the Congress mandap, to the street and the market. Close quote.
And again, Tilak, okay, is still known, but again, I don't think he's really got his due.
No. He has been branded as a terrorist and militant by the same Congress party. So, which brings us back. When you say Congress got us freedom, which Congress?
Exactly.
All right. And just as an additional data point, one of the vilest sections of the Indian society back then, who actively thirsted for Lokmanya Tilak's blood, who denounced him repeatedly in papers, who actively sought his prosecution, and who publicly rejoiced when he was sentenced by the British, this section of the Indian society is almost extinct today. Guess it was the Anglo-Indian community. In those days, this Anglo-Indian community was extensively patronized and funded by directly and indirectly by the British government, and therefore this community exerted tremendous public influence thanks to its clout in the English media. Okay, but we can do another episode on this. Anyway, this is why history is so compelling.
And relevant. Needs to be
and
brought.
with that, we can come to the penultimate section of today's episode, which is the split that occurred for the first time in the Indian National Congress, meaning the split occurred in the second phase of the history of the INC, and that kind of profoundly altered the fortunes of both the INC and the freedom struggle in a manner of speaking. Okay, and Lokmanya Balagangadhar Tilak's unfortunate death was also the death blow to this second phase of the history of the Indian National Congress. Okay. Now, before we come to that stage, we can look at what caused this split in the INC. The single most or the biggest reason for this first split in the INC was a partition of Bengal, a momentous event which occurred in 1905. And I think on that note we can conclude today's episode.
So you think the partition of Bengal was the trigger behind the first split?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So with that, we come to the conclusion of the second episode of the series we started with Sandeep Balakrishna on the untold story of the Congress Party as we know it today. And this is exactly why talking to Sandeep is so enlightening. He brought out so many lesser known facts into the public domain, and like me, I'm sure many of you in the audience would feel the same way. Surendranath Banerjee, a patriot of the highest order, I don't think has got any of his due in the annals of history. That the sannyasi movement was the inspiration for Bankim Chandra Chatterjee to actually visualize Bharat Mata and pen the rousing Vande Mataram credo is again perhaps not a well-known fact. So as we continue this conversation with Sandeep on the untold history of the Congress, I'm sure many more facets like this, many more nuggets would come to light. And again, while Lokmanya Tilak is revered and definitely better known than some of the names I took earlier, I think again naman and tribute to him for what he did to the country with both Shivaji Jayanti and Ganpati being the glues, bringing societies on the streets, and that continues till date. So naman to him. And like Sandeep said, we shall now get into the third episode in the subsequent episode as to how the first split happened in the erstwhile INC with the partition of Bengal in 1905. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure many of you would look forward to that part of the conversation. So thank you all for joining, following us all these episodes, and we look forward to your support and motivation for Dharma Conversations. Do like, share and subscribe to Dharma Podcast, and also donate should you find the content worthy of being consumed and shared further. So thank you all again.